Okay, so this is video 2 of lesson 4.4, equation of a linear relation. And again, we're going from words to an equation. So when you're trying to figure out what the equation is, first thing you need to know, what are the two things that we're trying to compare here? What is depending on what? So we need to know what's the dependent variable and what is the independent variable. What are the two things that are being compared? And once you know what the two variables are that are being compared, then you need to figure out, well, what's the constant rate of change between those two variables? How is the one variable increasing every time the other variable increases by 1? And we also need to know what the starting value is. So remember, every time you do the equation of a line, you need to know the constant rate of change and you need to know the starting value. And again, I'm going to take a look at this equation right here, y equals mx plus b. Remember y, we just talked about it in the last video. Y is whatever the dependent variable happens to be. M is your constant rate of change, your CROC. X is your independent variable, and B is the starting value. I'm just going to use SV for starting value. So technically here, Y and X are the two variables that are under consideration. And then we have M and B, and those aren't really variables. Those are what we call parameters. I'm going to write that down in a different color. So those are parameters. So those are the things that are special to the situation that you're looking at. So, I mean, you could have the same two variables, say cost and number of people, but different situations would have different parameters. So maybe the rate of change is $25 for one scenario, but it's $50 for another scenario. Or maybe the starting value is 0 for one scenario, but it's 20 for another scenario. So we're still talking about cost and number of people are the two variables. The cost depends on the number of people, but the parameters, the values of how those two variables are related to each other, that's what changes in each problem. Okay. So if you're given all of those things, all you need to do is substitute everything into the equation, and it's really easy. But then if you're not given all of those things, there's sometimes some things that you're going to have to do. You might have to put the information into a table of values so that you can figure out what the starting value is, or you might have to figure out what the constant rate of change is. It might not be so clear what it is that you're dealing with. Okay, so let's take a look at the first example. Ted makes $15 per hour at his job. Find his pay formula. So first thing you always have to do, just like with the last unit, you always have to identify your variables. Once you've identified your variables, then you can start making your equation. But you can't just make an equation all willy-nilly. You have to say what your variables are actually representing. So what are the things, what's dependent on what here? Well, how much Ted makes, so what his pay is, depends on how long he works for. So we're going to say, let's let P be his pay, and let's let, I don't know, H. You can pick whatever variables you want. So let H be the number of hours, or the time that he's working for. Okay, so Ted makes $15 per hour at his job. I mean, you all can tell me how to make that equation. If you had a job and you're making $15 an hour, how do you calculate how much you're going to make? Well, you take the $15 and you multiply it by the number of hours you're going to work. So the equation for this one is going to be simply his pay equals $15 times the number of hours. And that's it. You're done. And you can move on to the next question, because that's all we're trying to do is figure out what is the formula that's going to tell us how much he's going to make. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. A health club charges $200 membership fee. I'm going to underline that. And $55 per month to use the facility. find the cost formula for someone who wants to be a member. So what does the cost depend on? Well, it looks like this is going up monthly, so the total cost is going to depend on how many months he's going to be a member, or somebody is going to be a member there. So we're going to let C be the cost, and let's say M be the number of months. Okay? So for this particular facility, the cost has a starting membership fee of $200. So you want to join the club, you got to pay $200. So the cost is $200 plus $55 per month, so plus $55 per month. Now we don't put per month, we don't go $55 per month, because we're not trying to do 55 divided by M. We have to do 55 times M, and this is a formula. This isn't a word. We don't do short forms or anything like that. This is a formula of how the cost is going to get calculated. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one. A boiler holds 45,000 liters of water, starts to drain at a steady rate of 2,200 liters per minute. So find an equation to model the volume of the water over time. Okay, so we want to know what the volume is, and how much water there is in the boiler depends on how much time goes by, because the water is draining. So the volume, so we're going to let V be the volume of water. And how is the volume changing? Well, it's changing over time. It's time that's making the change happen, because the water is draining over time. So I'm going to say T, and this is in liters per minute. So I'm going to say T is the time in minutes. We're not going to do per hour, because we know how it's draining per minute. So the volume, how much water is there initially? What's the starting value of water? Well, the starting value is 45,000. And then what happens? Well, we lose, so it's draining. That's a negative 2,200 every minute. So 2,200 T. Okay. I think I'm going to stop that video right there, because they start to get a little bit harder after this, and I don't want to do them all at once. Okay?